Would you drive on a road surrounded by bushlands where murder victims have been found? A road linked to more than 82 crashes, some resulting in fatality, sitting beside a lagoon with a long history of drownings. Oh, and it's haunted by the 2 resident ghosts that said to appear in the back seat of your car and try and grab your steering wheel to drive you off the road. A road where your radio turns to static, electronics malfunction, and the feeling that something or someone is watching you from the tree line. Well, that's Wakehurst Parkway. Hi, I'm Nat and this is the Midnight Files, and welcome to another WTF Wednesday where I find something mildly concerning and instead of moving on like a normal person, I research it for hours, so let's unpack it together. Wakehurst Parkway is a 14-kilometre stretch of road running through Sydney's northern beaches, connecting Seaforth to Narrabeen. And if you're from Sydney, the chances are you've heard the stories. The ghostly woman in white, the nun standing beside the road, the ghostly hitchhiker in the backseat of your car, and that feeling that someone is watching you. I've driven along Wakehurst Parkway myself a few times. It usually ended up being during the day, and even then it still kind of feels eerie. There's large sections of roads surrounded just by dense bushland, and at night with the winding roads, poor lighting, fog, blind corners, and the isolation, it already feels kind of unsettling before you even know the stories attached to it. It's not just ghost stories attached to this road, there are real tragedies. Drownings, murders, car crashes, centuries of disturbing history over the same stretch of land. There are countless ghost stories and urban legends connected to Wakehurst Parkway, and most people say that their experiences happened late at night or in the early hours of the morning, and usually when they are alone. Some drivers have reported feeling icy cold hands touching the back of their neck whilst they're driving, while others say that their radio suddenly turns staticky, can even decrease or increase suddenly in sound, car doors locking and unlocking by themselves, windscreen wipers turning on unexpectedly, or headlights even flickering. Some people say they don't actually see anything at all, but instead they get this overwhelming sense of dread and a freezing cold feeling moving through their car. One woman said that she refuses to drive on Wakehurst Parkway alone after hearing heavy breathing coming from directly behind her while she was driving at night. Most common encounters seem to happen around Oxford Falls or near Deep Creek. There are so many stories of encounters told from members of the community, from paramedics, late night drivers, police, hikers, and just the Northern Beaches residents. The 2 most famous spirits associated with Wakehurst Parkway to be a mysterious nun/nurse looking ghost or a young woman known as Kelly. Both have reportedly seen sitting in the back seat of people's cars or standing silently on the side of the road. The nun has reportedly been seen for more than 50 years. One man described when he was driving home from work from Manly, it was just after 11 p.m. at night and it was a bit misty in May of 2016. As he drove over a rise near the 80-kilometre section sign, he noticed a woman standing on the opposite side of the road, and as he slowed down and he got closer, he realized that she looked ghostly pale and was dressed in this old-fashioned white uniform. And terrified, he sped up, but when he checked his rearview mirror moments later, she had completely vanished. Paranormal filmmaker Bianca Biasi believes the nun may not actually be a nun at all. She believes the sightings may be actually connected to Manly's quarantine station, and the quarantine station operated from the 1830s until 1984 and housed thousands of travellers arriving in Sydney by ship in order to prevent the spread of disease. So many people died there, and after researching old photographs of the station, Bianca realized that the nurse's uniform from the early 1900s looked almost identical to the description given by people who claimed to have seen the nun. The long white dresses and the veils the nurses wore in the 1900s resembled a traditional religious habit, which may explain why so many people interpreted the figure as a nun instead of a nurse. I mean, it's very different from today's nursing uniform, so you can definitely understand that mix-up. Not to mention that Quarantine Station is only a few minutes away from Deep Creek and Oxford Falls on the Wakehurst Parkway. A former paramedic spoke of stories involving a nun-like apparition appearing suddenly inside vehicles, grabbing people's steering wheels and trying to force drivers towards the tree line of the parkway. In 2010, a cab driver was driving down the parkway when he saw a grey silhouette of a woman sitting in the backseat of his car. He said that she was wearing like this white kind of gown and had a headdress on like a Christian nun, which also fits the description of the nurse/nun ghost that people seem to see. He said he couldn't really make out like distinct facial features on her, just the shape of her face. And when he looked in his revision mirror, he locked eyes with her and noticed that she had these really deep green eyes, and it shocked him so much, and he slammed his brake on. Then at the same time she just disappeared. And then on another night, the same cab driver said that he had picked up a female passenger and he had driven her before, and who had asked to be taken to the same spot on the road where he had previously seen the apparition sitting in the backseat of his car. And then what's really shocking is that he claims that later on he found out that this female passenger he had picked up had actually died a few weeks prior to her getting in his car. The second major ghostly legend is Kelly, and according to legend, Kelly died in a car accident on the Wakehurst Parkway sometime in the 1970s. I really tried to find out more information about where the legend of Kelly came from and the car crash she was supposedly in the 1970s, but I couldn't find any proper record or proper documentation, only people passing down the legend itself. People say that she appears late at night on the side of the road, usually near Oxford Falls, trying to get drivers to stop and pick her up. She is dressed in all white and sometimes has a veil covering her face, and other times she has visible injuries to her face. One woman reportedly described driving along the parkway during the 1970s near Oxford Falls when she saw a young girl in white standing beside the road. Feeling concerned, she pulled over and allowed the girl to get into her car. The woman said that her and Kelly chatted for most of the drive, and I would just love to know what they supposedly spoke about in that car, because that'd be really interesting. And then when they reached Narrabeen and she glanced into her rear vision mirror, the girl was gone. No door had opened, no footsteps were heard or any kind of sound. She just simply vanished from the backseat of her car. Kelly's story seems to follow this classic urban legend of a vanishing hitchhiker, and paranormal investigator Bianca later claimed that she had interviewed around 100 people who were believed to had experienced encounters connected to this figure. Many versions claim that if Kelly appears in the backseat of your car, you must tell her to leave, and if you don't, she will supposedly try and take control of your vehicle and force it off the road. Some people believe she isn't evil at all, but she's just traumatized, she's trapped on the Wakehurst Parkway, still trying to escape the place of where she died. Some people say that she appears standing directly in the middle of the road, and some claim to have even driven through her. One person told their story of an encounter they had in the 1990s. They saw this ghostly figure who they think is Kelly standing on the road on the Wakehurst Parkway, but on the Seaforth side, and they were with friends coming back from Manly around 2 a.m. As they came around a corner, she was just standing in the middle of the road, and they said that they drove straight through her, and they honestly felt like they had hit someone. They slammed their brakes on, and when they looked back, and they said that they could just see her standing there staring at them from the road. They said it was the scariest thing that they had ever been through. A different man was driving through Wakehurst Parkway and picked up Kelly, but at the time she had severe facial injuries, and when he found her wandering beside the road at night asking for help. Concerned about her injuries and being a young girl on the road at night time, he took her in his car and went straight to Mona Vale Hospital, but when they got to the hospital and he turned around to, help her get out of the car, and his backseat was empty and the young girl had just disappeared. Another person said they had a similar experience, and this man went into the emergency department to, seek out a nurse to come out to the car and help get this injured woman out together and bring her into the emergency department. But when they returned to the car with the nurse, there was nobody inside. Even hikers exploring trails near Deep Creek Reserve have described unsettling experiences. One woman claimed that she had been picnicking with friends near the reserve when they had been hearing strange noises in the darkness and developed this overwhelming feeling that they were being watched. After they had set up their picnic, she turns around where she felt like something was watching her from the tree line, and she sees this flickering light in the bush, and that apparently turned into a line of flames stretching out several meters across the ground, moving towards them. They all freaked out and quickly tried to pack up as much as they could before fleeing the area and apparently abandoning some items. That lady claims that she never went back to the Wakehurst Parkway ever again. The only thing I find with that story, which I found was a little confusing, is like, who goes on a picnic at nighttime? Like when she says she turns around and it was like pitch black. I don't know. I just find that kind of confusing. I don't know if she's just recounted her story incorrectly, or maybe she did genuinely go on a picnic at nighttime. But I mean, who goes for a picnic at nighttime in the middle of the bush? It just doesn't really make sense to me. Drivers have seen pedestrian crossings near Oxford Falls suddenly activating in the middle of the night, despite the fact that there was nobody there to press the button to turn on the pedestrian crossing. Around 15 years ago, a group of friends were driving along the road around midnight in two separate cars, and they decided to pull over into this small car park along the parkway to like stretch their legs and get some fresh air. And when they got out of the car, they heard a female scream at them, "Help me, help me," from the surrounding bush around them. They all got back in their cars, apparently like as quickly as they could, super freaked out by this, and got out of there as quickly as possible. I don't know, maybe they were just like unaware of all the stories attached to the parkway, but I don't think I would be wanting to pull over in a small car park on Wakehurst Parkway at midnight. Even if I was with other people. I don't know, it just seems like a really eerie spot to pull over. Some people even experience like sudden mechanical issues with their vehicles. A person recalls about 7 years ago they were driving back from Manly on the parkway around 11 p.m. at night, and suddenly their automatic transmission started playing up in their fairly new SUV, and the lights were flashing on and off, and they couldn't get their car to change down in gears. And they really felt like they were about to break down along the Wakehurst Parkway, and just kind of had like this sense of dread that something was wrong, and they really didn't want their car to break down. They kind of just like were willing it to continue on. And then as soon as they drove off the Wakehurst Parkway, it was like all of the issues in the car seemed to resolve themselves, and they just drove on like it had never happened. There are so many other accounts of paranormal experiences on the Wakehurst Parkway, and like surely with this many people all having different encounters, it must mean that something spooky is going on there. When you look into the history of Wakehurst Parkway, it's easy to understand why the surrounding bushland and the road may be haunted, because it has a very dark history attached to it. I mean, there are like several high-profile murders associated with the Wakehurst Parkway, and one of Australia's most infamous child murder cases became linked forever to the Wakehurst Parkway. In 1960, 8-year-old Graeme Thorne was murdered, and his body was found in the Wakehurst Parkway, and all because his family won the lottery. This would be a crime that would really change the way that Australians would see child safety forever.
8 years old Frederick Graeme Thorne, Australia's first victim of kidnapping on this day in 1960. Having left his Bondi home to meet a woman friend of the family and be escorted to school, Graeme never kept the appointment. While passing through a nearby paddock, the kidnapper struck.
He lived on the other side of the bridge in Bondi, and he attended Scots College Preparatory School in Bellevue Hill. And his parents had won more than £100,000 in an Opera House lottery, which is an enormous amount of money and equivalent to millions of dollars today. And really strange, but back then, lottery winners' names and home addresses, even sometimes their occupation, was published publicly in newspapers, which meant suddenly that everyone knew the Thorne family, how much money they won, and where they lived, which is just a terrible idea. I don't know who ever came up with that and thought that that would be a good idea, to post someone's full name, home address for everyone to see, and how much money they just won. On the 7th of July 1960, Graeme had left his home in Bondi to go to school following his usual route he took every morning. You know, at first maybe his parents thought he just missed the bus, that's why he didn't show up for school, and because maybe he decided to walk to school, so he was running running a little late, but he never arrived at school or came home that day. And then some witnesses came forward and apparently had seen a man talking to Graeme at a bus stop. And not long after Graeme had been reported missing, a ransom note had appeared to the Thornes household demanding £25,000 for his safe return. And the kidnapper had called himself Mr. Brown and instructed the family not to involve the police and organised complicated ransom drop instructions involving public phone boxes and train stations across Sydney, including the Wakehurst Parkway. Witnesses near the ransom drop locations reported seeing a distinctive blue Ford Custom Line station wagon acting suspiciously around the area, and police began tracing vehicles that matched the description of this blue station wagon and eventually identified one belonging to a quiet factory worker named Stephen Bradley. And as the investigation intensified, items belonging to Graeme began appearing near the Wakehurst Parkway and around the Seaforth bushland. His school case had been discovered beside the parkway and followed days later by additional belongings nearby. The discoveries terrified Sydney residents and fueled one of the largest police investigations in Australian history. But tragically, Graeme had actually already been murdered shortly after he was kidnapped, and 10 days later his body was discovered wrapped in a rug in vacant bushland in Seaforth, not far from the ransom exchange location. Then came the forensic breakthrough, and detectives painstakingly examined microscopic forensic evidence collected from the rug and surrounding materials, and investigators traced dog hairs, plant fragments, fibers, bottled blonde human hairs, and even particles of distinctive pink mortar back to Stephen Bradley's home. When detectives searched Bradley's car, they discovered the microscopic fibers, dog hairs, and flakes of the paint that matched the evidence connected to the kidnapping. And at the time, this kind of forensic investigation was groundbreaking and became one of the first major Australian cases solved by using trace evidence. Investigators later realized that Bradley had carefully planned the abduction after seeing that the Thorne family had won this lottery and it was publicly announced in the newspapers. Bradley was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, and the case permanently changed Australia forever. After Graeme's murder, lottery winners' identities were no longer allowed to be publicly released. Then in 1994, another deeply disturbing case became linked to the bushlands surrounding the Deep Creek Reserve near Wakehurst Parkway. 34-year-old Stephen Dempsey disappeared after visiting a man named Richard Leonard. The two men were known to each other, and during an altercation, Leonard had shot Dempsey with a compound bow and arrow. Like, what the fuck? A brutal and highly unusual murder weapon that shocked investigators when details later emerged. After killing him at Deep Creek Reserve, hiding it within isolated bushland surrounding the creek. But the crime didn't end there. According to investigators, Leonard later returned to the body, dismembered the remains, and stored body parts inside freezers at his home he shared with his girlfriend. Months later, Leonard and his girlfriend, Denise Shipley, travelled to Pittwater where they disposed of the remains in an attempt to permanently destroy evidence. Some body parts were later recovered by authorities, while others were never found. The brutality of the crime alone was horrifying, but what made this case even more disturbing was it was only the beginning. Not long after November 14th, Leonard and his girlfriend Shipley had committed another murder, this time targeting taxi driver and father of 7, Ezzeddine Barmad. Barmad had simply been working a night shift when Leonard and Shipley, who had just taken some LSD, entered his taxi. At some point during the journey, Leonard attacked and killed him, later attempting to conceal the crime and dispose of evidence connected to the murder. After the attack, Leonard and Shipley went to St. Vincent's Hospital, as they both sustained wounds from the attack, and investigators linked the two cases together through forensic evidence and inconsistencies in Leonard's statements, gradually revealing the full extent of the crimes. The investigation exposed a pattern of calculated violence, concealment, and attempts to destroy human remains in bushland and waterways surrounding the Wakehurst Parkway. Leonard was ultimately convicted and received multiple life sentences for the murders. In 1995, another tragic case became tied to the bushland surrounding Wakehurst Parkway. 21-year-old university student Frances Tizone disappeared after leaving her family home in Sydney's north. When she suddenly stopped contacting friends and family, concern quickly began to grow. Days later, her naked body was discovered dumped in bushland at French's Forest, which is only meters away from the Wakehurst Parkway. It was found that she had been strangled to death. The discovery shocked the local community. The isolated stretch of road surrounded by bushland where Frances was found increased public fear of the parkway and going into the surrounding bushlands. Police investigations soon focused on her former boyfriend, John Serator. Prosecutors alleged the relationship had become troubled and controlling, and that Serator had murdered Frances before dumping her body in bushland in an attempt to conceal the crime. During the investigation, detectives relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, witness statements, and inconsistencies in Serator's accounts of his movements. Serator was eventually convicted of Frances Tizone's murder and sentenced to prison. However, the case has remained quite controversial over the decades, with Serator continually maintaining his innocence and launching multiple appeals over the years in an attempt to overturn his conviction. These murders just add another layer of unsettling history to the bushlands surrounding Wakehurst Parkway. And then there's still the unsolved disappearance of Trudy Adams. Trudy was 18 years old when she vanished in June 1978 after leaving a dance at the Newport Surf Life Saving Club in Sydney's Northern Beaches. She'd been there with friends and her boyfriend, but left early sometime after midnight and decided to hitchhike home. The last confirmed sighting of Trudy was along Barrenjoey Road, heading towards the direction of Mona Vale and the broader Northern Beaches road network, including routes feeding towards Wakehurst Parkway. Witnesses saw her getting into a light-coloured panel van, and she was never seen ever again. At the time, it became one of the biggest missing persons investigations in New South Wales police history. Police interviewed thousands of people and searched bushland across the Northern Beaches for any sign of her. What makes this case even darker is that investigators later began linking her disappearance to a series of violent attacks and rapes committed around the Northern Beaches throughout the 1970s. Some detectives believe the same offender or offenders may have been responsible. Over the years, rumours spread that Trudy's body may have been dumped somewhere in the bushland around Wakehurst Parkway because of how isolated and dense the bushland was back then. The case has been reopened multiple times, rewards were increased, Colonial inquests were held, and police eventually declared Trudy likely died from homicide or misadventure. More than 45 years later, nobody has ever been charged with her disappearance, and her body has never been recovered. Unresolved mysteries surrounding Trudy Adams will probably always be tied to the Wakehurst Parkway and the eerie reputation that surrounds the road. There is also an uneasy amount of car crashes that have occurred on this 14-kilometre stretch of road. Wakehurst Parkway has become notorious for serious and fatal car crashes. Fog rolling across the road without warning, torrential rain, flooding, sharp bends cutting through dense bushland, wildlife darting from the trees, long isolated stretches with poor visibility and minimal lighting. Between 2017 and 2021 alone, official statistics recorded 82 car crashes on the parkway. Locals and road safety advocates have repeatedly raised concerns about dangerous intersections, flooding, and the unpredictable conditions that can transform the road in seconds. Over the decades, multiple fatal accidents have occurred along the road, and in 2013, a 19-year-old Sarah Duraza died after her vehicle left the road and struck a tree. Then in 2024, a nurse Phoebe Dawson was killed in a devastating head-on collision when conditions became treacherous in a severe thunderstorm. Long before the Wakehurst Parkway became known for the ghost stories and car crashes and murder victims, the surrounding bushland already carried quite a few dark stories dating back to as early as colonial times. I found this story really interesting, and it has a bit of a dark element to it, which could also be why the land and the lagoon is so haunted. A newspaper from 1913 recounts life around Narrabeen Lagoon, and the story tells of an Aboriginal chief named Yowell and his daughter Narrabeen, a woman the lagoon is supposedly named after. According to the account, Narrabeen had become suspicious after spotting a convict named Champion secretly meeting with a violent bushranger gang led by a man known as Big Mick. The gang had allegedly been planning an attack on this family called the Reynolds, and they had a farmhouse that was next to the lagoon. Champion began acting as a sort of inside man for them, and he had a plan to poison and kill the family's guard dogs so the bushrangers could approach unnoticed. After discovering the plot, Narrabeen rushed to warn her father, who gathered his men and rode to alert the Reynolds family. They barricaded up the farmhouse and sent off a message through the bush to Sydney for military assistance. And through the night, Yowell's men watched the lagoon, expecting the gang to try and cross the lagoon. But instead, the bushrangers had actually circled through the scrub undetected and had arrived at the property just before dawn to ambush them. At first light, Reynolds stepped outside believing the danger had passed, only to be shot instantly by Big Mick. And then for some reason, his wife thought it would be a good idea to come outside holding their infant child, and she was also killed moments later. A violent gunfight erupted inside the home, with the Reynolds' teenage son reportedly managing to shoot and kill Big Mick before the remaining bushrangers stormed the house and massacred the rest of the family. The gang looted the property and was drinking all of the family's rum, and Narrabeen had spotted in the distance that the soldiers had finally arrived from Sydney. Realizing the troops were closing in, the bushrangers fled towards the lagoon but were surrounded by soldiers and Yowell's warriors. Several were shot dead, and while the survivors were taken back to Sydney and they were later hung. During the chaos of this fight, fire spread through the farmhouse, ignited by a hidden keg of gunpowder that was lying beneath the floorboards, causing an explosion that destroyed much of the building. And according to the story, Champion, who was still locked inside the building, ended up being burned alive whilst the building went up in flames. I mean, it is a story from 1913, so we can't know if this story is entirely factual or partly folklore, but I thought it was quite interesting because it even shows such a dark history that surrounds the Wakehurst Parkway even as early as colonial times. Another disturbing incident linked to the area happened in 1924 near Deep Creek Bridge at Narrabeen Lagoon. A group of friends had been rowing across the lake and they suddenly heard agonizing screams coming from the bush that sounded like they were coming from a woman. And as they approached, they saw a man and woman struggling in the water. And as they got closer, the man ended up just sprinting off into the scrub and just completely disappeared. And it looked as though the man was attacking the woman, and them approaching him scared him off and ended up saving that female. The group ended up helping her and taking her to hospital, but unfortunately the man was never identified, and it's just another strange encounter associated with the area and the lagoon. Narrabeen Lagoon itself may look really nice and calm from the surface, but for more than centuries, the lagoon and the surrounding creeks have been linked to extraordinary number of drownings. At least 39 people are believed to have died in the lagoon and the systems over the years, a death toll reportedly higher than many ocean beaches. Many of those deaths were blamed on dredging carried out in the early 1900s, as sections of the lagoon were dug out to deepen the waterways and try and reclaim the land around. The once shallow floor became filled with hidden trenches, sudden drop-offs, and deep water holes around 20 feet deep. Areas where children had once safely paddled had become very dangerous. Over the decades, tragedy after tragedy followed. A 17-year-old boy drowned after stepping into a hidden hole around 20 feet deep in 1925. Then 2 years later, a 12-year-old girl drowned after she entered the water around waist deep, and then it suddenly dropped off and she was found at the bottom of a 20 feet deep hole. In the years that followed, more children and adults lost their lives in the lagoon and the creeks surrounding the Wakehurst Parkway. Adults and children who simply just went for a swim to be found at the bottom of these sudden drop-offs. Over time, the area developed an unsettling reputation among locals, not because of the crashing waves and dangerous surf, but because of what lay hidden beneath the surface of the water. It's just crazy like how many deaths are associated with one lagoon that the Wakehurst Parkway wraps around. As the parkway continues around from the lagoon, it follows some of the creeks off into the bushland. It's just a weird coincidence. The road has encounters, the lagoon has deaths, and the road follows the bushland and creeks that also have several instances and encounters, tragedies, and ghost stories. There is also evidence of Aboriginal history in the area. In 2005, workers excavating near the northern end of the parkway uncovered human skeletal remains, and at first they thought they discovered another murder victim, but instead archaeologists discovered the remains belonged to a Aboriginal man who was around 30 to 40 years old, and he died over 4,000 years ago from a ritual spearing. He became known as the Narrabeen Man. Their discovery shocked archaeologists, not just from how old the skeletal remains were, but the violent injuries found on the skeleton. The area surrounding Wakehurst Parkway also contains ancient Aboriginal carvings, and in 1952, letters to newspapers complained that motorists were driving over the top of these carvings and damaging them near the Wakehurst Parkway and in French's Forest. The carvings were considered culturally significant to the Aboriginal people. It just shows a blatant disrespect for the cultural significance of this land to the Aboriginal people, and like you just never really know what kind of bad juju it's going to stir up when you damage someone's cultural carvings and paintings. And then there's also this really strange story that's surrounding the memorial plaque commemorating the opening of the Wakehurst Parkway. In 1982, newspapers reported that the large 2-meter high sandstone monument marking the road's opening had been mysteriously smashed apart. Huge sandstone blocks weighing enormous amounts were reportedly thrown up to 15 meters away from the structure. The bronze plaque itself had already been stolen previously, and it's thought that they were trying to attempt to steal the plaque again. Police believed it may have been a vehicle that crashed into the monument, but that would cause significant damage to a car, and the police believed that the car would need to be towed away. But to crack or dislodge sandstone blocks that are that size would take enormous impact. The kind of force normally associated with a high speed crash or a sudden collision where tons of weight are brought to a stop almost instantly. Unlike another vehicle, because the rock is stationary, it absorbs very little of the impact, meaning that most of the force is violently transferred back into the car itself. In a crash powerful enough to shatter sandstone and send the pieces flying up to 15 meters through the air, you would normally expect catastrophic damage to the vehicle and potentially severe injuries to the driver, which to me makes the idea that all of this destruction occurred simply to steal the bronze plaque just doesn't add up, because you would fully total a car, you would potentially have catastrophic injuries, you would need to go to hospital, and you'd also need a tow truck to tow that broken car away. I don't know, to me just doesn't add up. This road has just so much real tragedy attached to it, even without the ghost stories, drownings in the lagoon, fatal car crashes, murders, disappearances, human remains discovered in the surrounding bushland, damage to ancient Aboriginal sites. There is just story after story tied to the same stretch of road and waterways. And I think that's why the Wakehurst Parkway has the reputation it does, because it doesn't just have, ghost stories and creepy encounters, but it also has so much death and tragedy that has become attached to the area over generations. The road itself has almost taken on a life of its own. I guess it just depends on what you think is true and what you believe in. To me, it definitely sounds haunted, and I'm even less inclined now to ever go driving on the Wakehurst Parkway again. I think I'll just find an alternative route. That's all for today's WTF Wednesday. Thanks so much for watching or listening, however you've stumbled across this channel. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below, and also if you've had any weird encounters or experiences on the Wakehurst Parkway, I would love to hear about them, and I'll see you guys in the next one.